So there is a potential spillage from Gaza into terrorism attacks.
Major General Chip Chapman, former head of counterterrorism at the Ministry of Defence. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Chloe.
Thank you for being with us. So tell me, how big a threat do you believe, and does MI5 believe, Russia and other rogue states now pose to us here in the UK?
Well, this is really the conclusion of a quad of speeches by the head of MI6, the head of MI5, GCHQ this week, or the NCSC, and Chief of Defence Staff. And all have really stated the same thing, that we're in the most complex threat environment we've ever seen. Now, what's really changed from MI5's perspective is if you look at last year's Intelligence Security Committee report, and they're the ones who oversee the agencies, 59% of effort then was against counterterrorism, 22%, which may surprise people, was against terrorism in Northern Ireland, and only 19% was about counter-state threats. That is now significantly risen. Ken McCullum's annual threat assessment speech on the 8th of October talked about 48% now going on to state threat investigations. So in a way, with the globalization of the Intifada and the Gaza effect, you've got a perfect storm of threats in both the terrorist sphere and in the state sphere, where, of course, you always have to prioritise resources. Now, their resources are fairly significant. Their budget last year was $4 billion, and they recruited 608 people against a target of 507. So, their resources are increasing. Their budget is also increased, and was increased in the recent budget. That was something that most people missed, that the agencies did have an uplift.
So do you feel then that we have underestimated rogue states, the likes of Russia, for too long? Or is this just a case that we are responding to differing challenges right now?
I think we are responding to different challenges. It's that thing of Lenin, that there are decades when nothing happens and there are weeks when decades happen. And we're certainly in that latter thing at the moment with this range of challenges. His annual speech, he quoted Iran, where we've had plot after plot at an unprecedented pace and scale, Russia and China, and we need to stop the exfiltration of data. So there's a lot in the cyber sphere, as well as the state-based sabotage and assassination plots. A lot of those, of course, have come from Iran, 15 of them. And we also have the GRU and the FSB from Russia, which is seeking to use the grey zone a lot, and by that we mean information ops, propaganda and subversion alongside deniable attacks, which is, of course, what they would say, for example, was the case with Litvinenko and Skripal, that they had nothing to do with it.
You mentioned Gaza a few moments ago. Some people will listen to this saying, is there a danger we leave ourselves exposed to terrorism if the focus is on these rogue states, when we think about presumably an increasing threat in light of the war in Gaza?
Well, that's true. I mean, again, Ken McCullum has recently said that there have been 43 plots since March 17. That's their baseline with the Manchester and London attacks then. And 1/3 of their top priority investigations are actually to do with ISKP, that is Islamic State Khorasan province. So there is a potential spillage from Gaza into terrorism attacks. But again, it depends on the metric, because in terms of lethality, the number of people killed in terrorism, the only terrorism attack which has killed someone is very early on, after the 7th of October, with an attack in Hartlepool, when someone was energized by what went on there, and attacked someone in an asylum hostel, actually, just after 7th of October. So what surprised me in a way is, although we've had more hate crime and more extremism, the translation of that into terrorism attacks has been pretty few.
This story is on the front page of the Times this morning, and it also quotes that Ken McCullum from this podcast said that MI5 is having to respond to growing terrorist threats from teenagers who, quote, are consuming too much of the wrong things on the internet. We understand 1 in 8 of those people being monitored by MI5 is under the age of 18. Is this a new threat?
It is, and it's one of those things which has come post-COVID, that the average age and these statistics of those who are arrested comes out every quarter, every 3 months. And you do see a rise in the number of under 18s represented in that metric. However, when people quote 50% rise, the baseline for that is often very small. It's from 40 to 20, but it is the consuming of extremist material online. And it's what we sometimes call the salad bar ideology, which doesn't necessarily mean they're radicalized into either an Islamist or right-wing mindset. It can be that mixed, clear and unstable factors come into this. And for example, we've just had someone who's been prosecuted and jailed in the last month for a anti-vax conspiracy theory. He wanted to attack Chris Whitty, the professor we all saw during COVID. So it's a whole melange of threats there which come from the social media sphere. And some of that is also exploited by the Russians to try and sow dissent within the UK and other foreign countries. So, for example, we have a thing we call the Internet Troll Factory in St. Petersburg, which is actually originally financed by Prigozhin. We'll all remember his name when he was before he met his demise.
Great to get your analysis this morning. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chloe.
That is Major General Chip Chapman, former head of counterterrorism at the Ministry of Defence. So really interesting picking up on that story on the front page of The Times today, that MI5 is shifting its focus away from terrorists towards rogue states. It's part of this internal civil service podcast, which was leaked to Aubrey Allegretti, the chief political correspondent at The Times. Interesting, though, that you heard there from Chip Chapman, that he was saying actually recruitment to MI5, although there's finite resources, which is what we heard there from Ken McCallum, head of MI5. There was a target of recruiting 507 extra people. They actually recruited 608. He said one thing that sort of went under the radar in the budget with everything else that was going on was that more money is going towards MI5, which can also be welcome. But he did point out, 43 plots since March 2017 have been foiled, and fantastic that they have been foiled, but nonetheless, that's 43 plots. And I guess it's that difficult balance, isn't it, between protecting ourselves from the rogue states, whether they be Russia or Iran or China, and then also looking at those potential counter-terrorism threats, which particularly, we've heard this on this programme, in light of what is happening in Gaza, that could be a greater threat.
And in so many ways, the terrorists innovate in so many ways. When it's an attritional war, it's an asymmetrical war in terms of the terrorists innovating, the security services innovating, and seeing what happens. Let us know what you think of what Ken McCallum is saying, and indeed Chip Chapman as well.